So looking back at your career, what advice would you give your 25-year-old self?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is follow what you're passionate about. A career is a marathon, right? It's not a sprint. And the people that choose careers or jobs for the wrong reason, like the ones that pay the most money, don't end up being successful because they can't make the sacrifices. They can't keep the energy going to sustain that. So I think that's really important. Pick something that you really feel strongly about, and you can bring your best game every day, right? The second thing is, if you want to advance, right, you've got to be willing to take risk.
Okay.
And calculated risk, but get involved with things that really matter or have lots of visibility with the company, that are the dial movers within the organization.
And are those risky because there's just a lot more eyes on that stuff?
I think they're risky because they're typically the problems that are really interesting and hard to solve. If they weren't, they would have already been solved, right?
Okay.
But when you get involved with those, you've got to take your game to the next level. You've got to really put the energy into it. I think those are two really critical things. Early in my career, I had a couple interesting opportunities. First was I started my career as a software developer, and after a couple years, I stopped out, and with a friend, we drove a car from Minneapolis, all the way to Tierra del Fuego. So it was a globalization experience, right? Yeah. And then after that, he was Brazilian, so we went to Brazil, and I spent about another year in Brazil, part working and part not working.
Really?
Yeah, and that was a great experience.
How old were you then?
I was mid-20s.
Okay.
And then when I came back, I joined EDS, as you mentioned before, but I had a couple interesting opportunities there. The first was General Motors acquired EDS in the early 80s. And that opened up a whole series of possibilities, right? So along with another gentleman, we moved to Detroit. And what we did is we looked at some of GM's technology and decided to commercialize their CAD/CAM technology and package it and engineer it for multi-tenancy, and then take it out to the design and engineering, the automotive design and engineering. So it was really like a startup within a corporation.
Yep.
And that was a fabulous experience. I did that for 4 years and created that line of business within EDS. And then after that, along came this opportunity to work on what at the time was the largest IT outsourcing deal that had ever been done. It was a $2 billion outsourcing deal, 10-year with Continental Airlines and the System 1 computer reservation system. So I worked on that deal team. So when those opportunities came along, I raised my hand. I said I wanted to be part of it. But then I gave it my all, right? And these were areas that were not in my comfort zone, that I had to learn new skills and acquire new skills. When I came to Capella Education Company, my second year into the job, part of the strategic plan was to really focus systemically on how to raise the retention rates of our learners, of our students. So I raised my hand for that and partnered with our university president. And we've delivered some great outcomes with that. But again, that was not naturally in my comfort zone. So things like that.
Yeah. Were there any things that you wish you'd have done more of early on?
I probably would have spent a little bit more time in the technical realm. I started, as I mentioned, I started as a software developer. Did that for a few years, but pretty quickly went into kind of a project manager and then leadership track. Okay. I think it would have been interesting to spend a bit more time and really master that game before I moved on.
Why is that?
I think there's a skill level and a knowledge and that you learn from that deep technical knowledge that you can continue to carry through your career, and it helps you connect with the architects and the developers in a better way.
Where do you go to get your information to stay on top of, one, the industry, but then also stay on top of how you can be best at your role?
Yeah, I mentioned a bit of that before about reading conferences and then inviting companies in to talk to you about what they're doing. Yep. But then there's also, especially in our industry, right, in higher education, the competition, so to speak, tends to be very transparent. Yep. So you can learn a lot from their earnings releases. You can learn a lot from interacting with their individuals. And then I also look for people that exhibit skills or capabilities that I think would help me grow in my position. And when I see that, I try to strengthen my skills there.
Okay. Can you give me an example of that?
Oh, communication skills, right? So how to do a really fabulous, engaging presentation. I think almost everybody has some trepidation about that, right?
Yep.
Speaking in public.
Yep.
And I see people I've worked with that are masters at that, right? And so looking at how they do that, and usually there's a theme and a pattern about how they do it, and if you kind of pay attention to it, you can start to use some of those techniques to make yourself better.
Is there any organizations that you're part of, or?
The Minnesota High Tech, so I'm not part of it. We participate in that. In the education space, there's a venue called Educause, which is for higher education, is the technology group.
Okay.
So I participate in that and present at that occasionally.
Okay.
Those are a couple examples.
Yep. Thinking of balance, you have family, and then personal.
Right.
How do you balance that? What's your process for that?
Yeah, so I don't have a magic recipe for this, but I think on the work balance part of it, the things that enable me to have the right amount of balance is back to the team again, having a great team, right?
Yep.
Secondly, having clear priorities, back to the strategy and prioritization. So have a great team and then know what matters and make sure we're focused on those, right? So that's the first part. The second part is, I know you have children that play hockey as well, and we have children that are in hockey, basketball, baseball, football, Cub Scouts, church events. So
the good news today is I did get the hockey equipment out of the
oh,
trunk
good.
before I brought you in the car, because it would have smelled much different than in here for you.
So outside of work and within my role, like any CIO, you kind of need to stay connected 24/7 at some level, right? But outside of work, my time is pretty much consumed by our kids at this point in my life. Now, there was a time, and I think there will be a time again, where I have more personal time. And when I get that, a couple things I really like to do. One is I'm a pilot, right? I have an instrument rating and a multi-engine rating. I have an airplane up at Crystal Airport that's gathering a coating of dust, because I haven't had any time for the last couple of years. But I find that...
What kind of airplane is it?
It's a Piper Dakota, which is a kind of a big engine Cherokee, so single engine. But what I find, it's an interesting combination of coordination, right? You have to have physical coordination skills along with cognitive challenges. And it's actually also very peaceful, right? Beautiful scenery, peaceful, sometimes by myself, sometimes not. The other thing I really like to do is I like to build stuff and restore stuff and fix stuff, right? So a couple years ago when I had more time, I did a winter project. I bought an old Harley Davidson motorcycle. 1958, it's called a Harley Hummer, which is an interesting motorcycle. Harley Davidson between 1948 and 1959 made a two-stroke light motorcycle that was for the servicemen coming back from World War II.
Oh, interesting.
And I don't know I can't even recall how I got interested in this motorcycle, but I found one that was in a barn in Wisconsin that was a complete basket case. So I slowly rebuilt it to a pristine condition. So I like to do things like that when I have time.
So I always find it interesting to kind of dissect people's interests from two different perspectives. And I found this in myself. There's things I do where I can reflect and think and maybe get some sort of inspiration or clarity around something I'm trying to solve.
Right.
And then there's activities that I do where I can't think. I'm so consumed by that activity that it gives me that kind of outlet away from everything.
Right.
When you're doing those activities, restoring the motorcycle, are you only thinking of that, or are you thinking of other things?
I'm only thinking about that at that point in time. I become very obsessed with those things at that moment. Now, on other times, though, I spend a lot of time in the car, laying in bed at night thinking about work problems, right? So, there's always that.
Yeah. It might be easier to drop you off just outside versus going back down into the room.
As long as you stop, as long as you come to a full stop.
I was thinking to have you roll out.
Yeah, there you go.
Like the Big Lebowski.
Yeah.
Could you do that? So I have one last question for you, and the question is for you to ask a question, and it's, what question would you like to ask other CIOs, CTOs, tech leaders?
Right. Well, I think the most maybe one of the most interesting questions is, what do other CIOs and CTOs think the role is going to look like in 10 years, right? I don't think it's going to change that profoundly maybe in the next 3 to 5. But so there's one school that I think thinks that the role is going to maybe take a step backwards, and with cloud computing, all the SaaS solutions, those solutions are going to be sold directly into business units. You already have the scenario that, many organizations, marketing spends more on IT than the rest of it, than the CIO does, right?
Yeah.
And so then what happens to the CIO? Do they become kind of in charge of integration and cybersecurity and more of a utilitarian function? And by the way, I don't agree with that school.
Yeah.
Or does it go the other path where it even becomes more strategic, more embedded in driving the business model? And I tend to believe that model, that scenario more, but it'd be interesting to understand what others think.
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, hey, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Appreciated it.
We'll talk soon.
Okay.